Good afternoon. Welcome to today's devotional. We're here at Glen Lutheran Church. I'm Pastor Christina. This is Pastor Gary. We are talking today about the third story in the narrative lectionary, which is the Joseph story. So what are your initial thoughts about this story?
Joseph. First thing that pops in my head is Donny Osmond.
In the Technicolor Dreamcoat.
And he's so do you suppose Joseph is really handsome because he's always played by on the Broadway or any place else? The traveling Broadway is always a handsome Mormon.
Well, he's supposed to be his father's favorite son,
Yeah.
so of course he must be very good-looking, charismatic, all those things.
The second thing I think of is Dolly Parton singing "My Coat of Many Colors." How about you? What do you think of?
I think of the VeggieTales version of the story. And I'm dating myself that I think of that.
You were raised in the church during the VeggieTale
I
years.
was, yeah. So Larry the Cucumber plays Joseph.
He does.
It's a good movie.
The story, even though it's very familiar, of course the summary of it is he's the oldest son, the only son of his father's favorite wife, which is Jacob and Rachel.
Was this a quiz?
No, I'm okay. Yes, it was.
Rachel?
And the other sister's name was
Leah.
They had 10 kids.
Well, and the two maidservants, the handmaids.
Yes.
In case you're watching The Handmaid's Tale on Hulu, you can connect this.
Oh, very cool. So the 10 brothers are jealous of Joseph, who's the favorite of his dad, which, how bad is that? So they throw him in a pit and
They sell him into slavery.
Sell him into slavery. A caravan comes by, takes him. And we're giving you the quick, fun version of it, but it is such a great story of what happens to this guy while he is there, and it all turns around in the end. He has to forgive his brothers. And
Yeah, it's
such
interesting.
drama.
In the narrative lectionary, we read the beginning of the story, chapter 37, and then we fast forward through all the fun parts and skip right to the end when they're reconciled together. I don't think real life works that way.
Goes that quick, no.
No.
One of the interesting theological things that is not all that popular, but I buy into it, is I do think Jesus, in telling the story of the Good Samaritan, is redoing the Joseph story of so many similarities of being beaten and thrown in a pit, and finally in the end, both of those stories are these transforming stories of unconditional love and forgiveness. So someday when I get a sabbatical and I take my sabbatical, I'm going to write my book on that concept, maybe.
That sounds like a good story. I think one of the things that stands out to me in this story is just how dysfunctional all these characters are in Genesis. And last week we read the story of Abraham and God's promises to Abraham, and
Yep.
then we skip a couple generations to get to this Joseph story. But these people, these patriarchs of our faith, they are not the most perfect people that God chose to work promises through. And so you have Jacob, who is a trickster, and then he has these 10 kids, and they're, selling their brother into slavery. They want to kill him. And then out of this comes, a story of salvation, right? Like, I think that's pretty telling for all of us. Gives me some hope, I think.
Yeah, I think you find the real heart of the beginning of that stuff is in the Jacob and Esau story. That's where
Right.
you see it all go off rail, where there's dysfunction, mom and one kid and dad and the other kid favorites. And what's up with that whole thing from that generation of the oldest son, without regards to his character or anything, gets all the blessings no matter what?
All right, they get more inheritance than the
Yeah.
other, and
Where does that come from? Why is that part of the thing?
I don't know, cultural thing. But I think this tells us the dangers of playing favorites, whether in your family or... My mom tells each one of me and my sisters we're all her third favorite. There are three of us.
Sometimes the youngest in the whole game. Are you the oldest or youngest?
I'm the oldest.
Yeah, you're favorite.
I am definitely favorite.
Favorite. I'm the youngest.
So we're going to fight now?
As the story goes, Benjamin becomes then the youngest, and he is the one who gets used as the prop by Joseph. And I think the story ultimately comes down to what level do you need to go to be able to forgive? What does that look like? And one of the things that's so cool about the Joseph story, as opposed to some of the other biblical stories where the characters are not fleshed out as well, this one you see, it literally has Joseph crying in the text as he's watching what happens to his brothers who've got to stand and beg before, and he wants to say, I'm your brother. And yes, there is something toxic in this family. There is generation to generation dysfunction that gets passed down. Gosh, but I think there's something more than that. I don't like to even look at these characters being, was that the word you used, toxic?
I use dysfunctional.
Dysfunctional,
but
yeah.
Same thing.
I think that's just so deeply human that it's not even just dysfunction. I mean, which family isn't dysfunctional on some level? And it's easy to jump into that psychological language rather than just say, theology trumps that stuff in some ways, I think. Look, we are broken people. We are compromised agents. And any kind of this reflection of divine forgiveness, it's so needed. And so, and the last sentence of this is your favorite. I forget what it is, but it's the essence of it.
Yeah, that what the brothers intended for harm, God used for good. And because ultimately, the fact that Joseph had this position of power in Egypt saved their family from this famine, because Joseph was able to take care of them during it. Which I think it makes a really interesting theological question of, like, did God cause this harm to befall Joseph so that he would be a source of deliverance for his family? Or what is God doing in this story? Especially, it's interesting to compare this tragedy of this famine to kind of what our country's facing right now with COVID, the pandemic, where there's so much suffering and people dying, and what good can come out of this?
I think in the literary understanding, the Joseph story clearly has some elements of Greek literature in it, even though this would have predated Greek literature, where the oracle speaks and gives this declaration, and then, you know, the pieces follow. And even though the main characters want to run away from the cast that they've been put in the end, they absolutely do exactly what they were told was going to happen. They didn't want to do. They slept with their mother, or
the grains of wheat vow to him. Or
yes,
in Joseph's story.
Yes, that's right. There's kind of a theme in this where, so is God in control of that? I don't think that's even the question. The question is how do we still remain faithful amongst the things that happen in our life that are either predetermined or happen for no reason. Floods happen and all of that kind of stuff. How do we become a better instrument of divine grace in the midst of all of that? It's part of the Joseph story here. It has a great happy ending too, right?
It does.
This is the end of Genesis, right? Before you head into the next story.
Yeah, so it ends good before tragedy strikes 400 years later.
You know.
But that's next week, so
That's next. Is it what I get next week in preaching is,
I would hope that the Exodus is in the lectionary, but I mean, I guess we'll find out next week.
I guess we will. Anything else we want to say about Joseph?
No, I think it's such a well-known story. It'll be fun to see what new things come out of it when we read it this Sunday.
It'll be another fabulous Sunday out in the parking lot at Glen Carey. We'll be out there for the month of October as the leaves start to change. October is such a fabulous month where now it begins with the colors changing and the crisp air coming in. And really by the middle of October, you really get to, I think, some of the most beautiful days of the year. So we'll be out there now for 4 more weeks or till the end of October. Then as a congregation, our council is setting the stage for us, Glen Carey, to return back inside for worship. We hope that there are no complications. If there is a surge in the coronavirus in the middle of November, we will have to be nimble and make new changes and find out what we do next. But we're hoping that this will carry us for a while and get us now through the winter months and see what happens next. We pray constantly for a return to a time in which we can hug and have coffee and be somewhat normal in all of this, and then hopefully learn the lessons that we were supposed to be taught. Maybe that's what the Joseph story is in part. There are lessons to be learned over and over and over again. And one of them, as I go sit in the sanctuary now, and I sit there and I look around and I think, what an incredibly gorgeous space to be able to sit in awe and reverence. And I think we lose that in church. We lose the reverence of the sacredness. That's why we have to go on vacations and in our life to come back and say, oh, I'm so glad for my house, that my chair or whatever it is, to make what has become commonplace sacred again. Maybe that's the theme of COVID when it's all said and done.
You don't know what you got till it's gone, something like that.
Who sang that?
I don't know.
A pop singer from the 80s. Bryan Adams, I think. I may be wrong.
That predates me.
He's from Canada. If that matters. Folks, it's good to be with you. We're sorry we were gone last week. We'll continue throughout the New Testament. Joseph this week, Moses coming after that, and then the stories, fabulous stories of the Old Testament unveiled for all of us throughout the winter here. Good to see you all. God's blessings.